Amazon has actually now released its own AI assistant, and it is named Q, the letter Q.
Not to be confused with Q Star at OpenAI.
Right. We need a whole podcast episode on how some of these things get named because we need to get some marketers in the room. Uh, Q is not actually a consumer facing AI assistant. It's actually designed to help employees with tasks at work and in their jobs, things like summarizing documents or answering questions using a company's data. So this makes Q much more a competitor with tools like Microsoft Copilot and ChatGPT Enterprise. Q, Amazon claims, is built to address enterprise concerns around security and privacy. For example, Amazon says it can be set up to allow or restrict access to certain types of data within a company based on your role, your permissions, your seniority, etc. Q can also access data that isn't on Amazon's servers if you want to give it access, including data from things like Slack and Gmail. Now, Q is actually built on Amazon Bedrock, which uses a variety of models, not just one. And that includes Amazon's Titan foundation model, as well as some third-party models from companies like Anthropic and Meta. Q is going to cost around $20 per user per month, is what's being reported right now. However, Q is already becoming a little bit controversial. We have seen some leaked documents reported on that were obtained by a website called platformer.news. The documents show that some employees at Amazon, quote, are sounding alarms about accuracy and privacy issues. They say, quote, Q is experiencing severe hallucinations and leaking confidential data, including, according to Platformer, the location of AWS data centers, internal discount programs, and unreleased features. So there's two pieces to this, Paul, I want to talk to you about. First up, can you kind of contextualize Amazon's role in the AI landscape, your thoughts on how big a deal Q is, and then we can dive into that second piece here about some of these security features.
Yeah, so unlike, a lot of other tech companies, Amazon wasn't sleeping at the wheel with AI. I mean, Amazon's been an AI company for 15, 20 years, from the robotics in their warehouses to predictive engines on Amazon predicting purchases to AWS, the leading, cloud provider. They have AI infused into everything. Generative AI wasn't really their domain. So again, like a lot of companies, once ChatGPT emerged last November, we started seeing a lot of these companies kind of racing to catch up. So the initial play from Amazon was this Bedrock, at least publicly facing, where they kind of did the Amazon play. They became the everything store for language models. So this idea is you already trust AWS, just like if you're a Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure, you trust them to host your corporate data, your confidential information. And so they built the ability to take these other models. So you mentioned there was Anthropic Claude, their own Amazon Titan, Stable Diffusion, Llama 2, and Jurassic are the ones that are in there right now, where you could go in and take any of these models and connect it to your data. So that was their initial generative AI play. And now with the introduction of Q, they're basically trying to take advantage of the fact that you do trust them to have your data. And if they build these generative AI capabilities in, you're more likely to do this. So, I think that the significance, we've talked with a lot of enterprises who are slow playing their decisions around generative AI because in part, they are concerned around the security and privacy side of connecting their data and trusting unknown third-party vendors to have access to that data. So it seems very logical that as we go into 2024, enterprises are going to look to Microsoft, Google, and Amazon as primary providers. Now, you would think OpenAI would be in that conversation too, but I got to think that there's some hesitancy right now, especially at bigger enterprises, to make a bet on OpenAI until everything sort of calms down. Because if you're a CIO or a CDO or even a CMO, and you were watching what happened the last 3 weeks, and you were either already in with OpenAI or you were planning on betting on OpenAI next year, and that was going to be your primary provider, like a ChatGPT enterprise, you got to question how good of a decision that would be right now. And so I think what's going to happen is going into next year, um, you're going to have some companies that will just rely on their single vendor. Amazon, Google, Microsoft are the logical ones. I think you're also going to see some enterprises that take a bit of a diverse approach to this, like spread their bets out a little bit, because we just don't know how it's going to play out. And we'll talk a little bit more about like large language models, foundation models in a minute in another topic. But you just don't know what they're going to be capable of 6 months from now. And so you're hesitant to make a big bet on, say, a third party SaaS company that's wrapping their technology over a foundation model that isn't theirs, because you don't know if the foundation models are going to be capable of doing things that you're going to be paying separate license fees for. So Amazon Q is interesting in that sense that it's going to give you these abilities, but you highlighted some of the concerns that they claim is the whole reason you would use this
Mm,
service. So
yeah.
that, they're saying it's security and privacy is part of the reason why. And that's what the New York Times article, I think that you mentioned touches on. And yet within 2 days, you see stories that, yeah, these things still hallucinate just like other language models. Like it's still going to make stuff up and you can't rely on it.
So maybe unpack that for us a little more, because I think there's a misconception sometimes that just because you're layering on an LLM or conversational assistant over your real company data, that somehow we've solved all these problems around hallucinations, around accuracy, and around how these tools operate.
Yeah, I think it's just good to keep remembering that large language models and these generative AI capabilities and applications, they don't function like traditional software where you tell it to do X and it does X every time the same way. The output isn't, always reliable. So I think there's going to be a natural assumption that, well, once we connect our data to it and it's looking at our knowledge base, and so if it's going to answer a customer service question or an internal question about data, that because it's going and looking at our files in AWS and our data, 100% of the time it's going to give us the correct answer. Or if we ask it to analyze our marketing analytics or run a CRM report for us, that it's going to be accurate 100% of the time. That's a natural thing to assume. That is not how these things work. So we see it all the time. You do a lot of talks, I do a lot of talks. You meet with these people after these talks, and these are the kinds of questions you get. It's like, oh, okay, so once we connect it to our data, they'll be accurate and we can trust them. And like, how much human do we really need in the loop once we do that?
Mm.
And the answer is you can't get the human out of the loop. You still have to have the people there. Like I did a talk last week for accounting firm leaders, and we were having these kinds of conversations where you're going to look at infusion of generative AI technology into the accounting industry. And so if you start thinking about like filling out tax forms, it's a natural thing that AI is going to be able to do, but you can't remove the CPA from that equation. Like they're still going to have to verify, they're still going to have to go through and do it. And so I think with Amazon Q, it's that kind of idea. Like, yeah, it has all these interesting use cases. There's all these ways you could potentially apply. Like it talks about summarizing strategy docs, filling out internal support tickets, answering questions about company policy. It's going to be able to do all those things, but not with 100% accuracy. And so this goes back to what we've talked about so many times, that education and training are so essential. Because if you're a big enterprise, and right now Amazon Q is just available in preview, but once it's rolled out for $20 a month or whatever it's going to cost, you have to teach your team that you can't just assume everything these things do is true. And there still has to be human agency. The human still is responsible for the final output or decision that's made. And so I think as we move into 2024 and we start seeing wider scale adoption of generative AI technologies, we have to, as companies, make sure we're providing the proper education and training so that people know how to use these, that it is not like traditional software.